Already? Good afternoon. Happy to stand for questions. I have a few comments before we start. First, I'd like to announce that we have appointed our first director of our state's newly created and first in the nation Office of Independent Investigations, Roger Rogoff. The legislature approved the creation of this office last year. It is going to provide very unbiased, independent investigations of police use of deadly force, independent of any involved law enforcement agency. This office is about getting to the truth about instances. It's about providing justice to families. And it's about getting truly independent investigations so that all of us can have a highly credible, factual basis upon which to make decisions. And Roger will take this appointment beginning June 16th. I am really happy that we have a person of his quality taking on this first-in-the-nation task. He's had a sterling legal justice career spanning service in the King County as a King County Superior Court judge. He served as a senior deputy prosecuting attorney, as an assistant United States attorney, and as a criminal defense lawyer. We appointed Roger because of both his extensive experience and because it's been so balanced through multiple viewpoints and levels of experience throughout the criminal justice system. He's had significant experience analyzing evidence both as a litigator and a neutral decision maker. And the thoughtfulness and vision he's demonstrated as a judge is very important in this position. So I appreciate the efforts of the OII Advisory Board in assisting us in the search for this director, and the recommendation was critical in this process. Today I'd like to update folks about our efforts to reduce homelessness in the state of Washington. And I am very pleased to say that we have a new, much more aggressive approach to have rapid supportive housing to reduce the number of people living in squalor on our public spaces. All of our communities have grappled with the colliding forces of COVID-19, the dramatic shortage of housing in our state, and a homelessness system that up till now has not been designed to act quickly to get rapid results against homelessness. And the impact has been obvious across our state. And I say across the state, I mean it's in every community in the state of Washington. Traditional housing and shelter options often have taken years, if not decades, to get done. We need shelter and housing options that can be available in weeks or months, not years or decades. And this is where we have good news. As part of the historic investments that the legislature is making on housing in general, they've approved an all-new approach that allows us to scale up our efforts much more quickly, backed with hundreds of millions of dollars for rapid capital acquisition to meet the crisis at hand. And I'm extremely pleased that the legislature joined me in making sure that we have rapid supportive housing so we can get people off of our right-of-ways, out of our parks, out of squalor, provide them supportive services and into shelter on a quick order. And we have the now capacity to do that. The Rapid Capital Acquisition Program is our state's first program to help local entities quickly purchase properties, such as hotels and apartments buildings, and turn them into shelter or housing. And importantly, legislators have approved funding to quickly build thousands of new units. And these rapid acquisition funds are already making a difference. Our State Department of Commerce, which is administering the funds, has already allocated initial grants for projects in 12 counties and cities. As of today, just 1 year after the launch, about 13 facilities have been built, which puts into operation a capacity to serve over 650 residents. These are in addition to the similar facilities being built by local governments across the state. And I visited them across the state, from the True Hope Village in Seattle to the Skagit First Step Center in Burlington. These projects provide space for people where they can experience safety and stability, and importantly, access to services. And I've spoken to residents who are able to transition off the street into a tiny house village and have successfully moved into permanent housing. Now, I mentioned the tiny house village concept. It is one of the concepts that we have seen working big time across the state of Washington. They provide people privacy. They provide a roof and a shelter. They provide hygienic conditions, usually a place to cook, and places to store personal property. This, in addition to shelter, what we think of more traditional shelter space, when combined with supportive services, can have great impacts on people's lives and allow us to rapidly get people off of our right-of-ways into these shelter and housing facilities. So these successes really give me hope that we're going to see, in the upcoming months, progress. This program has also been able to acquire 412 permanent homes or apartments that will be paired with supportive services that are provided on site. Now, the speed of these projects were not possible a couple years ago. It is also a case that we continue to grapple with encampments dangerously located on our highways. And we are dedicated to reducing the number of folks living in dangerous conditions on our state's right-of-ways. I believe this is both a moral obligation to get people out of these unsafe conditions and into the kind of rapid supportive housing that is both good for them, but will remove this blight along the right-of-ways of the state of Washington. So I'm pleased that the legislature joined me in appropriating $50 million this year that is dedicated to this transition for folks that today are living on our right-of-ways. And I have been very active with our state agencies to make sure that we move forward with this program, and that work is beginning immediately. Thanks to Commerce, WSDOT, and the Washington State Patrol, we have teams that have started coordinating with local governments and nonprofit organizations to identify where the safer shelter options are and to provide services. Teams are going to be doing outreach to encampment residents and may be able to begin transitioning people and offering services as early as mid-June. Now, all of these efforts, the supportive services combined with a much more rapid pace of housing alternatives, I believe is going to make a real difference in the state of Washington. Our Commerce Department will also be administering rounds of rapid capital funding this summer. And I encourage communities to take advantage of this new resource and apply. Every one of these projects makes a difference. And I am sure that our local partners will understand when we are insistent as a grantor of these funds that local communities will A, act with rapidity, and B, make sure that you help us transition people off of our state right-of-ways. Now, meanwhile, one of the most important things we can do, obviously, is to keep people from losing their housing. Eviction rent assistance is still available, and so is free legal help for low-income tenants who have received an eviction notice. And I believe that's the first in the nation as well. Information is on the Commerce's webpage. It's in dozens of languages at commerce.wa.gov/housing-assistance. People can also call 211 about possible resources in their community. So I'm happy that we are going to move quickly in the state of Washington. Before I take questions, I want to comment on the loss of 10 lives in Buffalo, followed by the shooting in California targeting a Taiwanese congregation. These are just two of the all too frequent instances of white supremacy and racism that is rearing its ugly head across the United States. We know that those dark forces are all too prevalent still in the United States, and every single person in public office ought to be standing against them. We cannot allow racism to, in any way, become normalized in the United States. And unfortunately, we have people in public life who are talking about the replacement theory, which somehow would fan the flames of racism in the state of Washington. That talk has to stop. And unfortunately, it's going on. And I thought, in all fairness, I ought to quote a Republican on this rather than a Democrat. It was Liz Cheney, Congressman Liz Cheney, daughter of former Vice President Dick Cheney, and she said it better than I could. She said that she was criticizing her party's leadership, saying that they have enabled white nationalism, white supremacy, and anti-Semitism. History has taught us that what begins with words ends in worse. GOP leaders must renounce and reject these views and those who hold them. Now, those are tough, demanding words from Republican Congresswoman Liz Cheney, and I think we ought to listen to them. And we're calling on everybody in public life to speak against this creeping poison in our community. It started when somebody said Barack Obama was born in Kenya, and it continues to Buffalo. And I hope people will speak up. I'd like to just finish by quoting Martin Luther King, who said, "Darkness cannot drive out darkness, only light can do that." I believe that's true. I think it's a moment to follow Dr. King. With that, happy to stand for your questions.
Governor, you gave examples of units built in the past year on homelessness, but are there specific goals that you want met on additional units or shelter space based on the new money that was allocated this year? And what do you think counties should do in those cases where people in encampments may decline shelter that is offered?
Well, our goal is to make sure every single dollar that's been appropriated is spent on how we want it spent, which is on rapid supportive housing. And that means it needs to provide rapid housing, not plans for 10-year projects. And that means tiny home villages. Some people have said that tiny home villages aren't, 100-year foundational support, but they get people out of the rain, they provide them privacy, and they work. And so I've seen this across the state of Washington, and we're going to be quite insistent with our grantees that people follow this kind of rapid model as one of the possible solutions. Shelters also are important, even in congregate settings, and many people don't like that, but we have to get people out of the rain. We have to look at the purchase of hotels and apartments as a potential option. I guess what I'm saying is we have to make sure it is rapid no matter which of these systems work in a particular circumstance, and we will have a mix of all of them. But all of them also have to provide supportive services for people. For those with mental health challenges, we need to provide them with mental health support to help them during this transition. It is a transition for people off the streets back into housing, and they need support. So we will be insistent that they get that support in that provision. As for those who won't go, they will simply have to comply with the law, which is they'll need to go. And we will have on our teams, on our state right-of-ways, the Department of Transportation will work to prioritize where this work is done. The Department of Commerce will work with local communities to make sure that those options are available to people. The Washington State Patrol will provide whatever law enforcement is necessary to make sure people comply with the law. And if we provide this housing options for them, there's no reason that people should not avail themselves of it.
On another topic, a few weeks ago you said the state would work to ensure abortion access in anticipation of whatever ruling comes out of the court. Have you had discussions with leaders in other states about coordinating policies or response, and can you talk specifically to any actions that you're prepared to take immediately upon a ruling?
Well, I haven't talked to other governors about this. I suspect I will. I'm actually going to be with some Democratic governors the next few days. But we've already taken action because we have already passed a law in the last session that would make it clear that we will not allow our citizens to be somehow prosecuted, in other states, to the extent we can prevent that. We also, to some degree, improve the appropriation for Planned Parenthood because we know there will be increased services demanded, folks coming over from Idaho and the like. So if there is additional support to make those services available, it's something we will consider. And there is a possibility of a constitutional amendment so that this would prevent the Republican Party, should they ever control the legislature and the governor's office, from taking away a woman's right of choice. And the reason I bring this up is I think there's a huge misunderstanding of the reality of this situation. It is clear, it is very unfortunate, but it is clear that the Republican Party is intent in taking away a woman's right of choice. They have made this clear. They have introduced over 40 bills to restrict a woman's right of choice in the last several years in the Washington State Legislature. All of their major office holders that they've nominated have dedicated themselves to this. Their presidential nominee certainly is. In Congress, Mitch McConnell made it clear that this even could be a national law to try to outlaw abortion. And I think people in Washington have been lulled into a false sense of security because we've had a Democratic majority for some period of time. But 2 nanoseconds, if the Republicans are in the majority in our legislature, it is abundantly clear that they will move to take away a woman's right of choice. I think that is clear. And people need to be aware of that risk exists. That's why a constitutional amendment would be wise. Now, can we pass that right now? Probably not, because it requires a supermajority and would require Republican support. But one way or another, we have to be very vigilant in preventing the Republican taking away the right of choice in this state.
Governor, can I go back to the housing issue? You had said that in clearing the right-of-ways that they will simply have to comply with the law. And you said if we provide the option of shelter, there's no reason they shouldn't take it. Last night, the city of Edmonds passed a law that essentially says if we provide this option and you don't take it, you'll be subject to a fine and possible arrest. Is that an approach you would support for those who don't take the option that is offered?
Well, if you're pitching a tent on the shoulder of I-5, you're going to, and we provide shelter with supportive services, then you will need to move, and there's just no question about that. And this is, you just have to follow the law. You can't be continuing to create these safety hazards on our right-of-ways, and these are safety hazards. I'm sorry?
Within cities, would you support them, individuals who reject going to available shelter and want to remain unsheltered, subject of the fines and arrest?
Well, I suppose to someone, you mentioned Edmonds, I just think of that roundabout in the middle of downtown. If somebody pitches a tent in the middle of that roundabout, one way or another, they're going to have to not pitch the tent in the middle of the road. And so there's got to be some way to prevent that. But that has to be coupled with a meaningful alternative for shelter. And that is made clear by a constitutional ruling by a federal court and our sense of compassion. And that's why I'm glad that we have won, almost $800 million, well, actually over $800 million this year to invest to be able to provide those alternatives for people. But for some degree, people have to some degree, be cooperative for this effort, and we'll help.
So, Governor, just to be clear, do you support finding people and putting them in jail then if they refuse to get help from somebody that's trying to?
I will say that if someone pitches a tent in the fast lane of I-5, they're going to have to move their tent. And if it takes a fine to convince them to move their tent, then I would say yes. Now, I can't speak to every circumstance in every tent in every city, but there are circumstances where one way or another, obviously, we have to have a way to prevent unsafe conditions from existing. But that has to be coupled with reasonable alternatives that, unfortunately, what I'm sharing with you is that we now have the opportunity to provide those alternatives for people, and I'm very happy about that, on a rapid basis, not years, but rapidly.
And the Mayor Harrell, about a month ago, complained to the state about tearing up a memorandum of understanding because the state has not been moving fast enough on encampments along right-of-ways. Is the state doing all it can to remove these camps in a timely fashion and taking responsibility for this? Or as it sounds like with the team's approach, you're still going to be relying on local outreach teams, cooperation with the city to do that? It's not an entirely all-state effort.
Well, we would like the cooperation of the cities in this regard. We are going to provide state money for shelters and the like, and we would hope and expect that the cities will work with this to have a certain portion of the housing they provide will go to people on our state right-of-ways. That has actually not been happening as much as we would like. We do need cities to help us on the people that we have to get off our right-of-ways into shelter. And if they're using all the shelter for other people and nothing for people in right-of-ways, they need to be partnering with us in this regard. And in our grant making, that will be one of the criteria to cooperate with the state, so that these, whatever shelter we build, a portion is going to be attributable to those that are on our right-of-ways, so that we can get this job done. And we're going to be expectant of the cities to cooperate with us in that regard.
Well, will the state provide its own team? You talk about teams. I wasn't sure who the teams are. Will the state provide its own outreach teams and eventually do everything by itself?
We'll have some portion of the outreach effort as state employees, but because we have interlocking service providers, they're going to need to work in coordination with the cities. And the cities are going to need a portion of their, quote, their shelters are going to need to be available to people who come off our right-of-ways. They can't just ignore the people living on the interstates. They're going to need to cooperate. Frankly, a couple cities I won't mention that haven't done that yet. So we're going to need some more cooperation from the cities as well.
Jumping off that topic for a second, with COVID cases rising in the state slowly, are you thinking of reissuing a mask mandate indoors? And if not, what would it take for you to consider that?
So that's not under consideration right now. So we don't have any immediate consideration of additional measures like that. And we may have some changes on this in the next week or so. We'll discuss in a few days probably.
Governor, in 1981, Timothy Pauly was convicted of a triple murder, sentenced to life in prison. Laws have changed. He's set to be paroled next month. Family members of his victims met with you, pleading for you to block his release. Are you going to get involved in the Timothy Pauly case?
So we're reviewing that case right now. As you know, I have an obligation to review that, or an opportunity, and I am in the process of reviewing all the facts and circumstances of what was clearly a very horrendous crime. I have met with the families. I understand the pain that they have undergone, and we hope to have a decision one way or another in the near future.
Governor, I wanted to give you an opportunity to comment on something I don't think you've been asked about, at least not in this room, which is the Oakley Carlson case. She's the missing 5-year-old from Grays Harbor County. And along those lines, I want to ask if you have any plans to order a review of how her case was handled by the child welfare system prior to being returned to her family and during that period of reunification.
Well, to start with, we have all kinds of inhibitions and inability to talk about these individual cases. As you know, there are privacy laws we have to respect. So I'm limited what I can tell you about any individual case. But I can tell you that we will have a review of any situation of this nature to make sure that it was handled appropriately. We have an ombuds office that is responsible for that. I'm confident that the appropriate decisions will be made and there will be a review.
Become an international news story. She's 5 years old, missing, hasn't been found. No one's
I can
been
comment
heard.
as a father of 3 and a grandfather of 4 that the heartache is beyond understanding, and I know all of us want to pitch in to help.
State departments are still a shortage of employees. What metric would convince you to lift the vaccine mandate for state employees?
Well, as I said, we may make some changes in the near future involving some contractors, frankly, and we're looking at that issue right now. But it's not so much a metric, it's the nature of the disease. We don't want our state employees going to the hospital or dying for several reasons. One, we care about them, and they do die if they don't get a vaccine. I've gone to funerals of state employees whose children have wept thinking about their parents who left us because they didn't get the vaccine. That is heartbreaking to me as a governor and should be to everyone. Number two, when that happens, we lose a valuable state employee that could be doing great work for the state of Washington. We want our people to be out there doing all the work and snow plows and ferries and everything else. And when they go to the hospital, they can't do that work. And number three, we don't want people coughing on folks, infecting them either. So it's not so much, I mean, to some degree there's a metric, but more importantly, the nature of the disease that is with us. And at the moment, the infection rate is actually going up. And the hospitalization rate is also going up today. So while it's going up at the moment, we think that it's not a moment to expose our state employees to that problem.
Well, just to follow up on that, people are saying you got to have something at the end of the tunnel because just like colds and flu, they may be around forever, and people are saying COVID's going to be around forever. So is there an end game in terms of the vaccine mandate? Do you think you will ever put out a metric so people can know what to expect?
I hope to. I hope to get to the point where we can do that. It is clearly not the case today. The common cold is not increasing in the infection rate today or in the hospitalization rate. COVID is. So that's the distinction. As I've said many, many times, this is a wily beast. We're going to make decisions every day based on the best available science, and that's what we're doing.
What about gas taxes? State gas users pay some of the highest rates in the country. Any more discussion of some sort of a tax holiday?
No. Listen, we know the difficulty with gas prices going up in part because of the war in Ukraine and COVID, supply chain interruptions and everything else. So we know it's difficult for people. But we don't think this is a solution because if we simply eliminate the gas tax, here's what happened. The oil companies just increased their price up to the same pain point. And what would happen is that those 16 cents or whatever you did, instead of going to the coffers where we can build roads, would just go to the oil companies in their profits. So we don't think giving oil companies more profits with less money to fix our roads is the right answer to this problem. But we have done some things to help low-income people with these prices, including the income tax, the earned income tax credit, which will help lower-income families about an average about $1,200 a year starting next year. That could be used to cushion the blow of these gas prices. We want to help people, not the oil companies. Now, there's another reason that's a difficulty here is if we did do a reduction, we'd have to stop these projects. So we got projects all over the state of Washington, the 520 bridge, maintenance. A bunch of these projects would have to stop. And we know people don't want to have more traffic jams in our state. We know we're a growing state. We have bonds that this money was bonded against that we have to find some solution to. So it's really not a solution either to help people. It's a solution to help the oil companies and delay our transportation infrastructure. I don't think that's the right thing for the state of Washington.
There are other states, including fellow Democratic governors, who have been putting out proposals to help more broadly help with the pain of inflation for a broader population. And so I know legislature's not in session right now, but we have another revenue forecast next month. And if that is yet another healthy revenue forecast like we've seen over the past year, is there any scenario in which you see that you would ask the legislature to come back if this inflation pain point continues to rise, to ask to give some of that money back in the form of rebates or credits or whatever, like we've seen in states from like Connecticut, California, and others?
Well, first off, those are states with income taxes. We don't have an income tax in the state of Washington. Our income tax is the lowest in the nation, which is 0. And so we are in a different situation than those other states, number one. The question is, would the revenue forecast ever to make this so that there was more dollars than we needed for our children and their mental health and housing? I would be very surprised if the revenue forecast would be of that dimension. Would never eliminate a possibility, but I'd be very surprised. Look, we got a homelessness crisis in our state. We have children with mental health crisis. We have transportation projects that have to get done that we can't just stop in the middle of the project. And if you did a gas tax reduction right now, all of those things would be jeopardized. We would not be able to do the rapid supportive housing. We would not be able to provide for the mental health that we did to the tune of almost $1 billion for our children in school. And we would not be able to finish these projects right now that are halfway through completion. And so I don't think that's an answer when all that money would just go to the oil companies. It's not going to go into our pockets. They will just turn around and increase their prices. They know where the pain point is. They know how far they can raise the price and still have us buy gas, and they will raise that cost to that point, which is where it is right now. And the difference that you reduce it in the tax would simply be a transfer from the state coffers to the oil companies. That's, look, I understand Republicans like oil companies, but to me that's carrying it too far in my book.
Regarding COVID, So gas prices are over $5 a gallon, and it looks like the hospitalization rate is bumping up against what's been your key metric, which is 5 per 100,000. And so if not another mask mandate, are you considering, for instance, a halt again on elective procedures or any other steps to address overcrowded hospitals?
So not at the moment. So our best projections of where we're going on this pandemic is that at the moment, we do not see it getting into that zone where our hospitals cannot function at the moment. Could that change? As I've said for 2 years now, anything is possible. But at the moment, we do not foresee that happening. We see a steady course.
What are you hearing in terms of the longer-term projections? I keep seeing the numbers going up here and across the country. Are you seeing anything that suggests a peak and a decline in the foreseeable future?
Well, it depends on what area you're looking at, but there are a lot of countries that have experienced an increase, as we are now seeing, and then a decrease at a little later date in the current variant. So there are some epidemiological projections to suggest that we will have a plateau sometime in the relatively near future. There's one from the IH, whatever it is, out there. And our health department believes right now would not be a moment to reinstate those measures.
With money, federal money running out or stalled right now on COVID preparations and continuations, is the state in a position to be able to step in with the allocation that was made in the current budget to help to continue the work that's been done on ensuring that people are getting boosters if they want them testing and whatnot?
I suppose it might be possible, but I believe Congress is going to step up to the plate. I hate to be optimistic about Congress, as you know, but I think we will get federal funding for this ultimately. That's what I believe will happen. Since you bring up vaccines, though, listen, I really hope people are getting boosted. It is one of the things that still is an exposure to people, because folks who got one shot, a year ago, a lot of that immunity has worn off, and we really encourage people to consider getting the booster shot to bring back that immunity. This particular variant may be less lethal, but it certainly has hospitalization potential and long COVID, which causes all kinds of grief for people. So we hope folks will continue to get boosters to really preserve their health.
Governor, I noticed that since the session ended, you've been continuing to raise money for your campaign. So I guess, are you running for re-election in 2024?
Well, we've been meaning to mention that to you, Jerry. I don't see you in my report yet, so we're a little disappointed by that. But in any event, just kidding. Look, I'm fully engaged in this job. I'm not giving thought to that issue. Although we've considered using it for strategic purposes, which is if people don't pass my bills, I'll threaten to run for a fourth term. How that could be a useful strategy. Okay? Thank you very much. Go Storm. Go Kraken. See you.